Hello, and welcome to my video on painting Stormtroopers. They're secretly easy. We're going to start with the Stormtrooper that's already been primed in Stynylrez gray primer all over, and our first color will be Vallejo model color intermediate blue. We'll be spraying this all over. Now I'm only doing one miniature at the time here, but what you'll want to be doing is 7 to 14 miniatures. Doing them in batches is much quicker, and this is where you're going to save your time. Now you'll see me put a little bit of water in the cup first on my airbrush. This is typically what I tend to do because Vallejo model color paints tend to be very thick. So I always put a little bit of water first so you're not getting a big glob of paint down there right on top of the needle. I mix in the paint. I'm using distilled water, not filtered. I find that the minerals or whatever in filtered water tend to leave watermarks and stuff like that, but there's really no need to go with these expensive airbrush thinners and all that. Distilled water works perfectly fine. Now you'll want to give it a good thorough coating, especially from the bottom. This is most important. On top, surfaces are not as important. Underneath, because this is going to be basically the color of the shadows, this intermediate blue, so spray upward into the bottom of the miniature. This will get you what you're looking for, the effect you're looking for. Next up, we're going to be doing Vallejo model color pale blue, and I don't know if you noticed that very full pot of paint, but I had a clog in the bottle and it scooshed everywhere into the cup. So what I ended up doing off screen was painting up a full batch of those miniatures because I had so much paint left over. Hopefully you will not have those clogs. With this particular color now, what we're going to want to do is come in at about a 45-degree angle, spinning the model, at which you'll see me spinning, rotating that miniature, but I'm keeping the airbrush at a consistent 45-degree angle. Now what you can do is you can actually move the airbrush up and down, but you have to maintain that 45-degree angle. And this is going to be your first highlight or mid-tone. You may have noticed that this is probably not the cleanest model. There is a lot of excess glue in the joints, kind of a rough, pebbly texture in places. This is due to, well, of course, excess glue, but also they use Krylon or Walmart brand primer, I believe, and then an enamel base coat, and it's just really not put down well. I tried stripping them, but ended up just deciding to go ahead and prime and then paint over them. Some of the recesses are extremely shallow because of all the excess paint prior, so that does provide a little bit of a challenge with these. For the next step, we're going to mix Vallejo model color pale blue and Vallejo model color white at about a 50-50 ratio, and we're going to spray this almost from a top down position, about 15 degrees, somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees. So essentially you're just catching the top of the dome on his head, the shoulder pads, the tops of the forearms, maybe the tops of the knees and the tops of the feet, or bottom of the ankle area, depending on the pose of the model. You're basically just wanting the uppermost brightest highlights at this point. For the next part, we're going to be using Vallejo Model Color Black. We're going to be cutting in the details and accessories here. The gun, the elbows of the bodysuit, the shoulder joints where the bodysuit shows, and the mask filtration area, the vent on top of the nose, the eyeballs, as well as those 4 little sunken in areas on the dome of his helmet. Some of the models have a shoulder pad. You'll want to work around the edges of it, as well as the holster on their hip. The rifle model has a big old black backpack you'll be cutting in, as well as the rifle and his holster as well. This requires a bit of a steady hand, and we will probably do a video later about steady hand techniques. Most of it is just learned over time and patience as you've gotten used to working with the models and stuff. But there are some techniques you can use that will actually help you steady your hand so that you can paint detail pieces like this. Right here I'm doing some minor touch-ups on the armor where I may have gotten a little out of hand with the black. I'm using a mixture of pale blue and intermediate blue, or pale blue and white, depending on the location of the area that needs correction. Underneath the brow of the eyes, you'll probably want to use intermediate blue by itself. The eyes are probably one of the easiest parts to paint on this because they have a really nice recess. Just plop your paint down in there. Just let it fill that hole up. Okay, thin it down a little bit. Let it fill that hole up. When it's dry and recess back a little bit, then you come in with your brush and some of that intermediate or that pale blue and white. Lay your brush on the rim around the eye. Trace that lower portion of the eye to cut it back in, and then turn your model up, and underneath the brow ridge you'll do a little bit of that intermediate blue, and your eyes are perfect at that point. It's probably one of the easiest eyes you'll ever paint on a model. For this next part, we'll be taking Vallejo Model Color Dark Gray and painting the edge highlights on the accessories. Now on this particular model, there's only two accessories, the gun and the gloves. So we'll paint the links of the fingers, we'll paint the fins on the carbine, the ejection port, the tailpiece of the gun, the scopes, those magazines, the barrel, etc., etc. Once that's done, then we'll move on to the next step. Our next step is to take Vallejo Model Color London Gray, and we're going to work with the very extreme highlights on the weapon and gloves. So we'll want to paint like the tip tops of his fingertips, the knuckles on his gloves, the very corner piece of the trigger guard, the edges of the heat sinks on the gun, the tip top of the scope, the corners of the magazines, the very tip top of the tailpiece and the barrel, those little details you want to pop from the gun, those are what we'll be painting now. Up next, we'll be painting some Scalecolor Adriatic blue. Probably the smallest amount of paint we will use on this model. So a very, very tiny little drop is all you will need. We're painting the 4 little vents, the little slots on the sides of his helmet. Now on most of these helmets, the vents, the slots are pretty well defined, but on some of them, either due to the building assembly process or the mold itself, they're a little shallow, so you may have to freehand those in. What we're seeing here is me coming back in and doing a few more of those London gray details that I had forgotten during the initial run. I looked at the model and realized, oh crap, I did not get the tips of these fingers. I didn't get this spot. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm just catching those small details. Now we've reached the varnishing stage. We'll use Vallejo gloss acrylic varnish on this. We'll want to spray it as smoothly and as thickly as possible without losing detail. Because the smoother that coat is, the better the multi-black will flow around those recesses. If you notice in this particular model, it's pretty rough, so I'm pretty much painting it in those recesses freehand. The other thing you'll notice too, the base is somehow suddenly tan. The reason why is I got out of sync in my process while I was recording the video and painted the base before the varnish. You don't want to do that. We will do that later, and I'll show it later, but for now you'll just realize, oh, this base is painted, but it should not be, so don't do it right now. Waiting for the varnish to dry is not the most exciting thing in the world, but if you're doing them in a batch where you're doing anywhere from 14 to 21 units at a time, this is not so bad. You can sit back, watch a little Netflix, grab a snack while the varnish cures, and once it's done, then you can come back in and start painting those details. And from here on, it's really quick, so all of a sudden, you'll have 3 units finished in no time.
Many unbearable hours later.
Now that the varnish is cured, you want to get out a liner brush and another brush that you can use for cleanup. I use these Dick Blick Masterclass Kolinsky brushes. They're about $5. They're not a bad little brush. They're not great, but they're not bad either. And it doesn't matter if they get wrecked because they are so cheap. The blue handle brush is one from Amazon. It was a multi-pack of like 60 brushes for $8. Super duper cheap. In this next step, we're going to be using Mr. Hobby Multi Black. It is an enamel wash, and you combine it with solvent. Now, the nice thing about it being enamel, and the solvent being enamel based, or for enamels, is they do not interact with the acrylics below them, including the varnish, which means we can use the solvent to clean up any messes on the wash without affecting the gloss underneath. That's the whole point of this little process that we're doing here. The observant among you may have noticed that there were 3 pots at the top of my work surface. One of them, the first one, is filled with multi-black that has been thinned with a little solvent already to thin it out some. The second one is solvent just for cleaning brushes. And the third one is solvent again to take a clean brush, get it just a little bit of clean solvent for cleanup on the armor itself. At this point, I'm breaking out the cheapo brush from Amazon and I'm dipping it in the clean solvent and I'm starting to clean up the lines. I kind of lay the brush across the ridge on the armor and the flat spot, so I'm feathering the edge of the wash a little bit, not directly wiping it out of the recess, so it kind of just blends it in a little bit better. There are outright corrections, of course, but most of the time it's just that kind of feathering that I'm doing by laying it over the ridge and the flat spot where I'm wanting the wash to lay and sweeping the brush that direction along that line. Now you see I've got the Dick Blick brush back out. I'm making a few corrections that I forgot, a couple panel lines here or there, so I'm going in and putting those in again, and then I'll clean those areas up as well. Remember that bit I said about painting the base, the texture paste, before the varnishing? Yeah, here's where we're actually painting the base. We should be doing this now, not before the gloss wash. So we'll take a little bit of Vallejo model color English uniform, Add a little bit of water and just kind of smear that all over that texture paste. Let it get down in the recesses. Come back with a second coat, and that should be enough coverage. Now that the English uniform paint is dry, we're going to get out the Citadel Ushabti bone. We'll put a little bit of paint in the bristles. We'll wipe most of it off on a paper towel. This is basically going to be an overbrush or a dry brush. Then we'll just sweep those bristles gently over the surface of the texture paste, catching just the tip tops of all those little textures. This should give us a fairly convincing sand look, which is what we're after. Okay, now that we have our sand texture, we're going to paint the base of the rim. As I was laughing about the other night, Juan Hidalgo on one of his YouTube videos said you can paint the base rim any color you like as long as it's black, which apparently came from Vince Venturella. I had no idea, but I am of the same mindset. Black rims are where it's at. Once the base is rimmed, we've come down to a decision point. We've come to the fork in the road, the proverbial stairway to heaven or highway to hell. Which do we do? Do we leave the armor glossy and paint the accessories down matte, or do we just matte the whole thing? I have done one of each. I'm still not sure which I prefer, but I will include photos of both of them at the end. Let me know in the comments below which you like. Do you like the glossy armor and the matted weapon and accessories, or do you like the entire miniature matted? Now for the final detail on the base, we're going to add a little clump of grass. This is from Gamer's Grass, I believe. Desert themed plant of some sort, 6mm tuft, I believe. I use a little bit of Loctite Ultra Control Gel super glue on the bottom of them. I know they're supposed to be self-adhesive, but I have found that over time that these lose their tack and they will come loose. So I always put super glue on them regardless. I will use my tweezers to kind of press down the edges, because if you don't, the edges kind of lift up because they're stiff, and you'll see a very unnatural like shelf underneath the static grass. So kind of press down all around the edges and kind of fluff the bush up with your tweezers after you've super glued it down. Last but not least, we will do the filter units on his mask. These will be using Citadel Leadbelcher. We'll paint the 2 little pips on either end and the 3 little vertical bars, which are not really bars. They're just kind of a single solitary piece that sort of has detail. But they would be 3 vertical bars if they had a little bit better detail in the miniature. So there you have it, folks. The pictures of the finished models. One of the models has been fully matted. The other one we left with the gloss on the armor and just matted the accessories. Please don't forget to comment below which you prefer. Do you like the matted armor? Do you like the gloss armor? Thank you all for watching. I would appreciate it if you would consider hitting that like and subscribe button. That would be great. I know everybody tells you to smash it. I'm not going to tell you to do that. But if you want to press it gently, gingerly, maybe caress it like you love it, that would be great.